I'll just start with a couple of thoughts. I think it's important to pay attention to what season you're in. I don't mean spring, summer, fall, but I kind of do spiritually. Whatever area, whatever season that you're in, it's very important to sort of keep your finger near the pulse of what the Holy Spirit is trying to say to you in that hour, what the Holy Spirit's trying to do in your circle in that hour, be it your friends, your church, your community at large. It's not a matter of feeding on the news all the time. I think some of us think that the way to hear from God is to be aware of what's going on in our surroundings, but that's never been the way that God works. In fact, we have an Old Testament example that when there's a hurricane and there's a lightning storm and there's wind, it's not always God speaking to the man of God. And I'm amazed at how many sermons are coming off of our feeding on Fox News and CNN. And it's basically the whirlwind, the hurricane, the rain, the earthquake, and we're not spending time in the closet to hear the still small voice because the Father isn't working out what Sean Hannity said last night. And so it's very, very important that we just listen to the Spirit of God to speak into our situation. I hope that wasn't too pointed for you. I'm just throwing a name out there, a name I've heard. So just do with that as you will. What I believe, however, is that you're not going to figure out what the Holy Spirit's trying to say and do in your moment and in your season by paying attention to Israel or by paying attention to the U.S. government. I believe you're going to have to listen to what the Holy Spirit is saying in you and what He's doing in your children and what He's doing in your marriage and what He's doing in your church, and you keep your finger close to that. And that's far more important that you understand that than that you have a grasp on foreign policy. And so lean into that and find the voice of the Holy Spirit in that hour because it'll do you much more good in the long run. It's always careful to balance and strike a balance between staying in your season long enough and staying in your season too long. And I just really believe that there's something to be said tonight for someone in this place that you've been talking to the Father about some of the areas in your life that maybe it's time to move on. And you've maybe made it a little more spiritual than it needs to be. You've waited on God to speak to you through the wind and the hurricane and the earthquake. But the Father wants to speak to you tonight through His Word, and that is often a still small voice. And I think He's going to reveal some things to you that I have found that if most people, this is my opinion, okay? I always try to say that before. I don't want you to feel like the Lord inspired it. This is entirely my opinion. But I feel like most people would give everything they have to be able to master the ability to know when to lay things down and when to pick things up. They'd pay any amount of money, they'd give their left arm if they could have the spot-on ability to say, now it's time to move. It's time to quit my job. It's time to move towns. It's time to pick this up. It's time to lay that down. It's time to start doing this. They'd give any amount of money to be able to nail that and not miss it. And why is it that we are so desperate to have that talent and yet the Holy Spirit lives inside of us and God's not hiding anything from us? You know, Corinthians says, eye hath not seen, ear hath not heard, neither hath it entered into the heart of the man the things which the Son of God hath prepared for him, but He hath revealed them unto us by His Spirit. Most of us just quit quoting at the end of the beginning. Well, I guess I'm supposed to be ignorant. God doesn't have to tell me anything. And yet you're one of His children. He doesn't live on the other side of a planet. He lives inside of you. He's very happy to be living there. Yes, it's temporary quarters. Permanent quarters are coming up someday. Temporary quarters, He's pretty happy to be where He is right now inside of you. And while He's there, He's intimate. He has relationship with you and wants to speak. And so stop the lie, rebuke the lie that you're just meant to be in the dark, that you're not meant to know, because that's not the will of God. He wants you to be able to know, and He wants to make it quite simple for you. I want to take you to a parable in Luke chapter 13 tonight. This was a parable that you don't hear very often. In fact, I don't know the last time I actually heard a sermon on the parable of the barren fig tree. And it's not, the minute I say that, it's not the barren fig tree you're thinking of. Remember, the Gospels tell the story of Jesus going into Jerusalem and there's a fig tree and He wants figs. So He goes to the fig tree and He doesn't find figs, so He curses it, and then He goes into the temple and clears the temple and He comes back out. I'm telling you the story I'm not going to tell you. I'm telling you the story we're not going to read. And he comes back out and the fig tree's barren and the disciples go, Lord, look, there's the fig tree you cursed. And Jesus says, hey, don't be amazed at that. Any mountain you say, be thou removed and cast into the sea, and don't doubt in your heart you'll have whatever it is you say. And there's a powerful message that Mark tries to present to you there. This is not that message. And what I mean by that is when I talk about parable of the barren fig, this is why I'm amazed we don't hear this one more. We hear barren fig, we got that other one in our head, so much so that this is one that many of us have looked over in the text. And maybe it's because it only appears, or it appears only in this form in Luke's gospel. Luke chapter 13, verse number 6, he also spoke this parable. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. Now that sounds very much like Jesus' action towards the fig tree. Watch how Jesus adds to that story. Then he said to the keeper of his vineyard, look, for 3 years I've come seeking fruit on this tree and I've found none. Cut it down. Why does it use up the ground? I think the old King James says, cut it down. Why does it cumber up the ground? But he answered and said to him, sir, leave it alone this year also until I dig around it and fertilize it. King James says, until I manure it. And if it bears fruit, well, but if not, after that you can cut it down. Now, I find this to be a pretty fascinating Jesus story. Here's Jesus standing in front of his audience, telling a story very similar to a story he's acted out in front of them in part. He acted out in part the facing a barren fig tree and cursing it and it being dead by the next day, 24 hours dead. Here, Jesus drags the story out a little bit. It's not a man standing in front of a fig tree and killing it. It's a man standing in front of a fig tree and the owner of the fig tree saying to the man, cut that tree down. And the man arguing back to the owner and saying, no, give me a little more time with it. If I were to cultivate it with fertilizer for at least a year, we might be able to bring something out of it. I'll concede, however, that it probably won't produce. It hasn't produced for 3 years. Who am I to assume I can get it to produce in 12 more months? So I'll give you this. Give me permission to try. Give me 12 months. I fertilize it. If we get fruit, great. Everybody wins. If we don't get fruit, I'll concede. We'll cut it down. Now, this is a spectacular story in the fact that it doesn't appear anywhere else. Jesus has already gave us a fig tree analogy of cursing a fig tree without figs. And yet here is a conversation between an owner and a cultivator standing in front of a very similar tree, talking about the fact that he's visited it. In fact, the Greek tense, look at that verse and look at that phrase in verse 6. A certain man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came. In the Greek syntax, and he came is progressive present tense. It means that the man has kept coming over and over and over to the tree. And he even goes so far as to say, I have kept coming for 3 years. Now, we don't know if he means I've been coming at 3 years at harvest time, or if he means I've been showing up here every day, once a week, once a month, whatever, for the past 3 years. And anytime you do the same thing for 3 years and get no results, it might be time to cut the root and move on. And yet the man that's in charge of taking care of the trees has a rebuttal argument. He says, I know 3 years is a long time. I know you've put forth a lot of patience and long suffering and a lot of effort, and you want fruit. Why wouldn't you? It's your tree. You deserve fruit. But if you'll give me a year to pour myself into taking care of it, to fertilize it, to baby it, to water it, to weed it, to prune it, to clip it, to make sure nothing's coming and stealing the fruit in the middle of the night. I'll watch out for it. Give me a year. And if in a year it doesn't happen, I concede all good things must come to an end.